Night story. What I'm about to tell is perhaps one of the most painful experiences of my life, and I hope it serves as an example so you protect your children from bad temptations. There were always many of us in the house. When I say the house, I'm talking about my grandparents' house in a town in Yaracuy many years ago. In that house, for a time, almost everyone from my mother's family lived. There were up to 15 of us cousins who spent almost every afternoon alone while the adults were busy with their tasks. We had plenty of space. I still remember the house. It had like 6 rooms, a giant living room with a smooth red floor where we would slide on our bellies on soapy water when they made us clean. The patio was L-shaped, full of all kinds of trees. We spent our time playing there until nightfall. At some point, we got into the habit of gathering at night on a concrete slab, piso, my grandfather had made in the patio to pile corn. We would sit in a circle there to tell jokes and scary stories. That's where I would conspire with the older kids to scare the younger ones. At some point they couldn't take it anymore and would run off crying into the house. One day we wanted to trick them with a number guessing game. One of us would go behind everyone with a piece of paper, while the one who was supposedly going to guess the number stayed with the others on the slab. The only thing we used was a white stone. The thing is, we had a system to know which numbers were coming up. So when the one who went behind everyone to write the number on the paper, the one in the circle already knew which one it was. We did it with words, colors, and names of things. The little ones were amazed and we secretly made fun of them. One day my brother, I don't know where he saw it, stood in the middle of the circle and started drawing something else inside it like intersecting triangles. He was tracing them from a page he had in his hand. I asked him what that was and he told me it was something he had seen in a magic book. We had an uncle who liked to read a lot. You'd get up to pee in the early morning and see the light of the candle in his room on. Precisely, he was reading. But he also always showed curiosity about spiritual things, and my grandmother fought with him a lot about it because whenever they saw him doing strange prayers, marking his skin with scribbles, leaving glasses of water in the corners of the house. My grandmother even went so far as to isolate him in a small room at the back of the house. He left all his things abandoned there one morning when he left and never returned. My brother, who sometimes talked to him out of all of us, picked up the habit of going into that room to look through his things. It scared me because there were also a bunch of strange drawings in there because my uncle also painted, but his paintings were very scary. He only drew eyes of all shapes and sizes. They were terrifying eyes. That day my brother had a piece of yellowed paper in his hand, and on it, he had drawn a circle crossed by several triangles. That's what he was replicating on the ground. Now, he said, everyone ask. We were all looking without understanding. I found this magic circle. You can ask it things, he told us. It's magic, he repeated, excited. On a few occasions, I knew my uncle had taught him some innocent tricks, sleight of hand, nothing extraordinary, and he was marveled by it. But that time his attitude didn't seem innocent at all. You could perceive a dense aura around him as if his gaze had changed. Several cousins, the younger ones, scared by the way my brother was talking, didn't stay to find out how the game worked and immediately went back into the house. The usual 5 of us who got together to do mischief stayed. My brother, 2 female cousins, a neighbor who was always with us, and me. Where did you get that from? I asked him, more worried than excited because my brother always showed unusual behavior in how he related to people. He always seemed calm but was quite reckless. I never saw him insult anyone or threaten to hit them. When someone made him angry, he would just walk calmly in front of you without saying anything, get close, and break your mouth with one punch. You rarely saw it coming, or he'd let you forget all about it, and then suddenly, on some other day, he'd knock the wind out of you with a kick. That's how he was, unpredictable. I was afraid of him, truth be told, even though he was younger than me. We hesitated to go along with it, but we also thought it was some nonsense. So the first one to stand in the middle of the circle was my neighbor. My brother stood at one end where he had drawn a square outside the circle and said, "Ask me anything about yourself that no one else knows." The neighbor asked him what he had eaten for breakfast that day. My brother was quiet for a while as we all held back the urge to laugh, but in the end he said he didn't know, that he must have drawn the circle wrong. "Let's change," I told the neighbor, and I stood in the middle. "How many girls have I kissed?" I asked. Everyone burst out laughing. 3, my brother answered immediately. "I wish," I said. "None. Your circle doesn't work. Let's play something else." My brother stared at the paper for a while and began trying to read something written on it. There were tiny red letters with several words separated by hyphens. "Maybe you have to say some phrases," he wondered aloud. He stayed there deciphering it for several minutes but couldn't figure out what it was. The others, bored, started protesting, wanting to play something else. So my brother had no choice but to put his paper away and go along with the majority. In the end, we couldn't agree on anything and my grandmother called us to eat. Later, when we were going to sleep, my brother starts telling me he can't close his eyes because he hears someone calling him. I told him to stop making things up, that he wasn't going to scare me, and that he should rather go to sleep because the next day we had to walk a lot to help an uncle sell some halakas, traditional Venezuelan dish. But he said it wasn't made up, that someone was calling him, that he heard a whisper in his ear like from an old man. If you want, come over here, I told him. We slept in a bunk bed, he was on the bottom. Come up, I said, but he didn't answer. After a while, I felt him get up, leave the room and say something to my mom who was in the living room. I didn't pay attention and fell asleep. Suddenly, in the early morning, I don't know what time it was, I feel him start kicking the boards from below. He used to do that to wake me up. What's wrong? I asked half asleep. I'm scared, he said. Well, why did you go playing with my uncle's things? I responded. But come on, get up here, sleep up here with me. When I told him that, I felt him get out of his bed, put his feet on the floor and grab the bed rails with his hands to climb up. However, he just stood there. I could only see the silhouette of his hands suspended, as if waiting to jump up. So I asked him while I stretched my hand to find his face in the darkness. When I finally grabbed his hair, trying to pull his ear, my mom enters the room with a candle and a cup of hot water. At that moment, I opened my eyes wide and realized that where I had my hand stretched out, there was no one. I tried to hide my shock so my mom wouldn't realize I was scared, but she walked right past to the center of the room and stopped in front of a chair where my brother was, covered with towels, drowsy and shaking with fever. What happened to him? I asked, scared. He's dying and you don't even notice? My mom told me, very worried. A little later, my grandmother came in. But he was fine, he ate the same as everyone else. I don't know what's wrong with him. Could it be he was messing around? She asked. That was a long night. The fever subsided a bit by daybreak. At that hour, a neighbor who knew about medicine, whom my grandfather had gone to get, arrived. They gave him a remedy, a kind of syrup, and my brother fell asleep until around noon when he woke up. From then on, the nightmare began. He would be fine for days when suddenly a fever would hit him that made him lose strength and faint. They took him to every clinic there was, but he didn't get better. One afternoon, we were all in the living room having lunch. He had had a relapse and was in my grandmother's room. Suddenly, we heard a loud thud in the room where he was, as if a heavy log had fallen on the floor. We all ran to see, thinking the roof had collapsed or something, but nothing was wrong. He was sitting in the middle of the bed with his head looking up, his mouth open exaggeratedly, almost tearing his jaw, his arms arched with his hands resting behind him in an unnatural way, stiff, without saying a single word. My grandmother, as soon as she saw him, made the sign of the cross. She and my mom went to hug him while they prayed. The rest of us just stood paralyzed, watching what was happening. The younger ones, some started crying and others ran away from there. A few hours later, they took my brother to a hospital. They thought it was an epileptic seizure, a stroke or something, but they didn't find anything concrete. They simply told us his heart had stopped and they couldn't resuscitate him. The boy was unrecognizable. His forehead had turned completely black, and his face was completely swollen. And I don't know why, standing in front of his gurney, I felt he was crying and trying to tell me something. That night was the worst of all. They hadn't even released the body yet. We were all gathered in the living room of the house, crying for my brother, when we heard the echo of a distant child's scream coming from the patio. No one got up to see what it was. We stayed there sitting, our gaze fixed on the floor, holding hands in the light of the candles. The scream was still there, increasingly persistent, as if getting closer. And this, my whole family can confirm, none of us was able to lift our heads when we saw the bare feet of a child pass through the middle of us, walk to the center of the gathering, stay there for a few seconds, and when several of us lifted our heads almost at the same time, we saw the shadow disappear into the wall of the alleyway that led to the patio, as if a child had run through there. I could say that was my brother. But that would be tormenting myself with the idea that his soul is in torment. I prefer to think it wasn't him because whatever the reason for his death, I have faith that God has granted him redemption.